If you believe that Americans caused the Vietnam War, that Americans wreak havoc and destruction in Vietnam, that Americans were defeated in Vietnam, and that the Vietnam War was over, you are a fool because you are brainwashed by communist propaganda. The truth is completely in the contrary. It is Viet Cong who caused the Vietnam War on purpose, who wreak havoc and destruction in Vietnam until now, and the Vietnam War is not over. Believing that Americans were defeated by Viet Cong is ridiculously absurd. Vietnam is a country that can't even manufacture a rifle, so how could it possibly defeat the United States? How can the whole world believe such blatant and outrageous nonsense propaganda? This world is truly beyond redemption in its stupidity. The Vietnam War was not between Vietnamese against the French and then against the Americans. It started since 1945 between Vietnamese nationalists against the Viet Minh, the predecessor of Viet Cong, who colluded with the France to be its territorial government. Then it became the war between the nation of Vietnam against Communist Viet Minh, Viet Cong, when France granted full independence of Vietnam back to the Nguyen's dynasty, who France stole Vietnam from. France never fought Viet Cong because after returning independence to Vietnam, Viet Cong was no longer of French concern, it was of the nation of Vietnam concern. France only helped the nation of Vietnam to guard against Communist China, the owner of Viet Cong, from seizing Vietnam, similar to what it did in Korea. The Battle of Dien Bien Phu was between the Vietnamese, France ally against Communist China and its Viet Cong lackey, not between France and Viet Cong only. After Communist China successfully seized North Vietnam, in 1954, it set up North Vietnam Colony in the north and prepared it to invade South Vietnam. That was why the United States of America aided South Vietnam government, the Republic of Vietnam, and organized the SEATO bloc to rescue Vietnam from Commie China expansionism, not to invade Vietnam. Americans were not defeated in Vietnam. American defeat was communist propaganda. Everything you learned about the Vietnam War are the lies propagated by American, European, Chinese Communist, and Viet Cong. Learn the truth. Learn how American withdrew from Vietnam. It was a peace accord called the Paris Accord in 1973 when the South Vietnam country, the Republic of Vietnam, the ROV, still alive and well with the whole territory intact and protected by the Paris Accord until free and real election. How could Americans be defeated when their objective were achieved, and that is the intact of the RV when they withdrew? But then the American Communist Democrat Congress colluded with Viet Cong, trampled the Paris Accord, and killed the Republic of Vietnam in 1975. Americans and ROV never been defeated by communists. It is American communists in democratic disguise who trampled the Paris Peace Accord and killed the Republic of Vietnam. And the only victim defeated in the Vietnam War is Vietnam people, not the USA. It is Vietnamese who lost the Vietnam War, not Americans, not Viet Cong. Mind you that Viet Cong is not Vietnam. Because after the Vietnam War, the USA still remains the most powerful country on earth, but Viet Cong had to kowtow and beg the USA for economic favors. It is Viet Cong who had to kiss the capitalist ass, not the other way around. Meanwhile, since the Vietnam War, Vietnam became one of the most impoverished countries on earth. Tens of millions of Vietnamese fled the countries to take refuge politically and economically all over the world. Women sold themselves to foreigners, in fake marriage overseas, and implicit prostitution inside Vietnam for tourists. Men are sold for cheap labors and cartel business organized by Chinese communist financiers all over the world. The whole Vietnam is sold out to globalists, mostly Chinese red capitalists. All the showcases of capitalist splendors you see in Vietnam now is not from Vietnamese, by Vietnamese and for Vietnamese, but from globalists, by globalists and for Viet Cong red capitalists too, but not for Vietnamese. The result shows it all, that it is not the USA who lost the war, it is Vietnam, not Viet Cong, who lost the war. Why Viet Cong and their cronies are so proud about victory. The Paris Peace Accord guarantees that the USA and the Republic of Vietnam would not be defeated by military means, because Communist China, Viet Cong's mother, and Viet Cong have agreed that the fate of South Vietnam was determined by South Vietnamese votes. and the whole world accepted it too. Vietnam War was international war between Commies bloc versus Allies of Nations bloc, the SEATO, and both sides in Vietnam accepted weapons and aids from foreigners to carry on the fight. Therefore, it was not only the attacking by Viet Cong that violated the treaty, it was the cowards stopping all military aids to the Republic of Vietnam in case of an attack, as promised by the treaty. By the American Communist Congress violated the treaty. A fully aided country's violating of a treaty and boasting victory over non-aided country is not a real victory, it is a robbery. Why are you so proud of it? The Vietnam War is not over because the Paris Peace Accord is not time-limited, and the Vietnamese people of the Republic of Vietnam, ROV, still fight on against the crimes that Viet Cong continues to wreak the country of Vietnam after it illegally invaded the ROV. Here's some truth about the origin of the Vietnam War. First, Viet Minh, the predecessor of Viet Cong, was the political gangs organized and controlled by Communist Ho Chi Minh, who was not representing the people of Vietnam because no one voted for him. Viet Minh seized the Vietnamese government of King Bao Dai in 1945. Second, from 1945 to 1947, Viet Minh betrayed Vietnam by colluding with the French and killed Vietnamese who resisted the French territorial policy. Viet Minh killed more Vietnamese in those 2 years than the French did in 100 years of colony. Third, no, it was not Viet Minh who defeated the French in 1954. It was Communist China with Communist Russian weapons who defeated the French Vietnamese allies. Fourth, the Nguyen's dynasty was never the henchmen of France. They demanded a complete independence for Vietnam since the 1860s. Why was King Bao Dai a henchman of France? The independence of Vietnam granted by France was authentic and was accepted by the free world with 2 treaties, 1947 and 1948. Fifth, by 1945, France was no longer a colonist country. The Department of Colony had been dismantled. France already became a republic, so the so-called the People resistance against French colonialism was a blatant farce used to deceive the stupid Vietnamese, who fell for it, and the whole world. Sixth, President Ngo Dinh Diem was not a puppet of the USA but a mandarin of King Bao Dai, and he was elected by the Vietnamese people in a fair election against King Bao Dai before the USA got involved in the Vietnam War. There is no evidence that he was installed by the USA. Military aided, yes, but not installed, and the USA legitimately and officially organized the SEATO bloc to rescue Vietnam from Commie China expansionism, not invade Vietnam. Seventh, the USA and the Republic of Vietnam never signed the Geneva Treaty, only the Communists and the French signed it, so there is no such thing as violation the treaty that they did not sign. 8. Chinese Commies was created by Russian Commies in 1930, Viet Cong Commies was created by Chinese Commies in Hong Kong in 1932. The South Viet Cong was created by the North Viet Cong in 1962. They're international communists who used Vietnamese to expand global communism, not to liberate anything. Viet Cong is not Vietnam. Look at Viet Cong's flag. It looks exactly like Commie China flag. Evidently, it is a province of Communist China. Vietnam needs to be liberated from evil Chinese dog Viet Cong. The whole world is deceived by Viet Cong since 1945. The war against French colonialism is a big lies. The war against American imperialism is another fucking lies. The so-called Vietnam Invincible is a communist propaganda bullshit. The so-called Vietnam economy development is another blatant lies. Viet Cong is not American friend either. Viet Cong has been a parasite who sucks American blood dried since the 1980s when they used Vietnamese people for economy favors from the US. Viet Cong dupes everybody into believing that they are Vietnamese who fight China for 2,000 years. Nothing is more stupid than that. Viet Cong never ever fight Commie China because they are Commie China's dogs. If you do not believe me, wait until war between Commie China and the United States breaks out. You will find out whose side Viet Cong is on. And when Commie China dies, Viet Cong will die like a dog die along with its master. You might say, but Viet Cong fought China in the 1979 border war. The truth is that that war was not the war between the two countries, but between the two factions of Vietnamese Communist Party. It was the war between the Commie Russia dogs against the Commie China dogs to rule Indochina after Americans' withdrawal. Unfortunately for Vietnam, the Russian dogs kicked the Chinese dogs out. That was why Commie China taught Commie Russia dogs a lesson in 1979, but retreated. That was why the Paris Peace Accord was trampled by the Russia dogs, and the Republic of Vietnam, RV, was killed. Had the Commie China dogs won the war, the RV would have been saved, because Commie China at that time had forced Viet Cong to honor the Paris Peace Accord that forbids Viet Cong from invading the South, because Commie China was trying to get economy favors from the United States.